Greetings, ladies and gentlemen of the internet. This is Rock and Roll Spot coming at you with the third installment of HeroClix 101. This time, the focus will be on the history of the game as well as, to a degree, basically where necessary, terminology. First off, the history of the game. It was started in 2002, and the first 5 years are referred to by most of us players as the Rev U era, or Rev era. Called such because of the fact that at the time, most of the figures in a set were part of a Rev set, which would be a 3-figure set comprised of the same character to show the evolution of the character. The rookie level having a yellow circle around the dial, denoting, and usually it was a cheap and not that powerful piece. Experience would have a blue circle around the dial and be slightly more powerful than the rookie, but still not too terribly great. Or some cases though, you'd be surprised. And then the veteran would have a red circle around the dial, and usually the veteran was generally the best version for obvious reasons. Then you also had uniques, which were, uniques. Also in this turn you had limited edition figures, which were, generally speaking, used as prize support for tournaments, which would basically take a figure that had a Rev set, make a unique version, but instead of using the character's code name, they would either use the character's true identity in the case of a figure, an LE based on a figure, for example, the Deadpool figure from Mutant Mayhem. Its LE is Wade Wilson. However, there were also, just as now, generics. So you would quite often get a generic would have an LE made of it that would also have a name. Eventually, they would cut down the number of LEs made, and generics didn't get LEs anymore. Also during this time period, set size and set design was very different. In fact, the game was very simple to play then. Basically, all you needed to play was a map, at least one other player, and each player having 2 dice and a power and abilities chart. That's all you needed. But like I said, set design and set size was different. The average set during this time was 96 figures. There were some sets were larger or smaller. Usually, though, like I said, on average, 96. 84 figures as part of Rev sets, and 12 uniques, which the 12 uniques would be the equivalent now of a super rare. Starting with for Marvel with the Mutant Mayhem set and DC Legacy, cardboard components were introduced into the game. These were completely optional. They were feats, which could be played on characters for an additional point cost. Battlefield conditions, which basically you play at the beginning of the game, and it had a blanket effect for that game. And bystander tokens, which were basically additional characters that you could have. Usually they were allies of heroes that were not, heroes. Amongst some of the characters made as bystander tokens were Aunt May, Willie Lumpkin, the Fantastic Four's mailman, Moira McTaggart, and so on and so forth. Feats were basically add-ons to powers, or sometimes it was a way to make a power work in a better manner, I guess. Starting with the Fantastic Forces set, you also got alternate team ability feats, which these feats would sometimes have a point cost assigned to them, which would be per character, and some of them had a 0 point cost. Now, feats in general eventually got very, very abused. Um, some of the most well-known within the gaming, the HeroClix community, were the various uses of the Thunderbolt's alternate team ability, which initially alternate team abilities required a specific team symbol. It was basically it was an easier way of creating a new team ability within the game without having to reprint without having to come up with a new team symbol and make sure and to get all the information out to everyone about what the new team did. Now the Thunderbolt's team ability, well, alternate team ability, I should say, it as originally printed required the Avengers team ability, and that was all. Any character with the Avengers team symbol could use it, and it cost 5 points per character. However, it said you could pick a team ability that could be copied by a wild card team ability, which really which pretty much was the vast majority of team abilities existing in the game at the time. This obviously led to a great deal of abuse. Quite often you would see players with a very low cost Avenger character and Thunderbolts played on them because it's only the characters with the Avengers team ability that the cost refers to. And then a whole bunch of wild cards copying that whichever team ability you picked. In fact, there was a point where I remember playing in a tournament, and when I showed that I was running a Thunderbolts team, which admittedly this team consisted of all characters with the Avengers team ability, my choice of team ability was not guessed quickly, but I remember my opponent saying, well, it's either going to be Mystics, Batman, or Ultimates. And I actually, as I recall, it was neither. But eventually ATAs were fixed. But we'll get to how they were fixed later on, as it was part of a later era. Another change another thing they started introducing as a means of getting more players interested were the concepts of both New Guy Night, where the idea would be you bring a new player to the game or to your venue, and each of you would then get a free figure. It would basically be from a specific set. But it would also have a different dial. The sculpt would be the same as the figure in the set already, but everything else about it would be different. And then there was also brick figures, or buy it by the brick figures. The idea with this was you would buy what was considered to be a brick of booster packs. Initially, when this was started, this was again during the review era. A booster pack was a 4-figure booster, and they were packaged in cases of 48. A brick was at that time a quarter of a case, or 12 boosters. Now cases are packaged as 2 10-booster bricks, with the 10 boosters consisting of 5, with each booster consisting of 5 figures as opposed to 4. But you would buy your brick, and then it would be a form you'd fill out, send in with the UPCs, and check for shipping and handling, and soon enough you'd get a limited figure. However, there were various problems that occurred over the years with them. For example, one of the biggest was the lack of supply versus demand for the world's finest brick figure from Crisis. 5,000 figures were printed, and they sold very quickly. And there were quite a few players left wanting. Anyway, this continued for a while, and then the last two Rev sets, or Rev U era sets, Supernova for Marvel and Origins for DC, also brought in chase figures. Now, it can be argued that chase figures existed previously in the game in the form of the first two giant figures, Ultimate Giant Man and Steel. Ultimate Giant Man from Mutant Mayhem and Steel from Legacy. But those were really just add-ons to the set, as far as I've ever been able to understand it. Now, as I said, these last two review sets included chase figures in the form of one with the Supernova set, the first four Marvel Zombie figures, which were actually compatible with the sister game to HeroClix, HeroClix, which at some point explanations of the differences between the two will be explained. Again, they were packaged 1 in 100 boosters, and there's still, honestly, I think I saw one once in person. In Origins, there were 4 important allies. It's also worthy to note that bystander tokens existed previously to Mutant Mayhem and Legacy, and were packaged with certain terrain packs, as well as the occasional as well as with some 3D objects. However, it was with Mutant Mayhem and Legacy that they became a regular portion of a set. But these 4 important allies were Queen Hippolyta, Wonder Woman's mother, Lois Lane, I'm sure I don't have to explain who she is, Alfred Pennyworth, again, that should be enough, and the Wizard Shazam. And they were packaged about 1 in 80 boosters in Legacy. Again, they were obviously not exactly easy to find. However, a few months after Origin released, the 5th anniversary of the game was celebrated with, and the tagline for that year was "Expect Anything," and sweeping changes were made with the game, and it is what is now what's generally referred to by some as the Cursor era. First off, set size and design changed drastically. Previously, sets had a very loose theme. And in fact, you pretty much always had specific characters in a set, regardless of whether or not they fit. For Marvel, Wolverine, Spider-Man, for the first few years, Daredevil, Hulk, and Elektra as well. But those characters were pretty much in every set, in one form or fashion, no matter what. For DC, Batman, Superman. However, with the beginning of the Cursor era, we had the first full set in the era was Avengers, which, well, it did have a Spider-Man, the Iron Spider variation thereof, but it had no Wolverine, which was actually somewhat of a surprise for me, as at the time Wolverine had recently become an Avenger, and I figured, well, we're finally going to get us a Wolverine, an Avenger Wolverine, cool. But that didn't happen for a while. But the size of the sets also was drastically changed, going from, I guess, on an average of 96 figures to 60 figures. Now, it's worth noting also that yes, it's less figures, but this is actually something I went over. I did years ago, going through the lists of the set lists for the first handful of cursor sets. There may have been less figures in the sets, but there were more characters. Because the concept of the Rev set was completely done away with, and uniques were no longer just super rares. Uniques were now throughout the rarities, which in some cases sadly meant us players were saddled with quite a few uniques, or copies of specific uniques when they were made common. But it was now a rare thing to get more than one version of a character in a set. And in fact, the sculpt was very specific to which version of the character we were getting. Also introduced in this era was character cards, which, of course, as we know, denote traits, special powers, explanations for specific powers, and so on and so forth. Another major thing that came of this was theme teams. Now, before this era, this is probably the one thing that I think most players agree was one of the best things to come of it. And that is the theme team rules. Now, originally, theme team rules were blanket rules that had, if everyone on your team had a common keyword, then you got these various bonuses. The theme team rules have since been changed to reflect the concept of both generic theme teams and non-generic theme teams. This partially came out of what happened, or some events where a mystical theme team was used, which basically which went against the entire reason for people clamoring for theme rules in the first place. However, in 2000, things seemed to be going great. Sets were selling out before they were actually released. Every set was selling out. I think fan reaction seemed to be fairly positive. Tournaments, well, in my area, tournaments were so-so, when it came to turnout. In other areas, it was great. But in 2008, shortly after the release of the Arkham Asylum set, the announcement came down that WizKids was no more. Topps, who by that point had bought out WizKids, shut the doors. Basically, the way I heard about it was that people showed up to work on a Monday morning just only to find out they no longer had jobs. For the next year, various groups were. The future of the game was questionable at best. Many people got out of the game at that point. Well, you know what? WizKids is gone. It's the game. The game's over. They punched out at that point. However, in the summer of 2009, I believe it was at San Diego Comic-Con. It was revealed that the company known as Nika was selling the Thor's Mighty Chariot piece, which was set to be the brick figure for the at that time unreleased Hammer of Thor set. So this, of course, led to speculation. Did Nika get the property? Which a couple months later, they announced that yes, they did have the property, and they quickly put out the Hammer of Thor set, which was, for the most part, completely done. Was almost completely done and ready to ship. So that made it really easy to just get something out very quickly. Now, the first few sets that NECA put out were fairly consistent. 60 figure sets. Chase figures remained to be a thing. In Hammer of Thor, it was Frog of Thunder, and oh God, what was it? Oh, the Thor Buster Iron Man. Then came the DC Brave and the Bold set, which made some changes to duo figures, and also was the first set to actually have a focus on the duo figure mechanic. It also introduced the alter ego mechanic, which for specific versions of specific characters, you could swap out their civilian identity for their power or superhero identity. The set Brave and the Bold itself had 4 alter ego characters: Bruce Wayne, Clark Kent, Diana Prince, and Jason Blood, who could turn into Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, and Etrigan the Demon, respectively. Then, however, one of the major changes that was made right off the bat with NECA's releases was that feats, battlefield conditions, and bystander tokens were pretty much phased out. Being phased out, at least printed versions. And again, printed versions in the booster packs. There were still, at least for the first few sets, there were tournament prize feats and whatnot, as well as special object tokens. Starter sets were eventually replaced with what are known as Fast Forces sets. Now, a starter set generally had about 7 figures, and usually, more often than not, these would be 7 figures that would be tied into a recent set release, and they would all have an interlink, a link to one another. However, like I said, whereas Fast Forces consist of 6 figures with sculpts are the same for the set as in the regular set. For by way of comparison, we have here Deadpool from both the Deadpool Thunderbolts Fast Forces set, and we have Deadpool from the actual booster set. Now, as you'll notice, the sculpts are exactly the same. However, the point cost is different. The booster set Deadpool clocks in at 135 or 90 points, depending on which one you want to use, whereas the Fast Forces one comes in at 90 points. Now, of course, the dials are very different. Well, at least as different as they can be and still be both Deadpool dials. But also, the figures in Fast Forces sets are actually designed in such a manner so that you can make even point amount teams based upon the figures in just the Fast Forces. Fast Forces that also includes a 2-sided map. In the case of Deadpool, it was the mall indoor, which is actually a redesigned version of one of the old maps from the Review era, which was a shopping mall. And on the flip side of that, we have The Thunderbolt Submarine, which I might add is surrounded by water terrain. Yep. Now, like I said, but that is pretty much the extent of what you get in a Fast Forces set. You don't get rule booklets usually. At least it's rare to get rule booklets, which I think is a failing of WizKids on that. Of Nika and the design on that. Nor do you get a power and abilities chart, which again that's a bit of a failing there. But yeah, some other changes. Non-comic book properties. Now, I'm totally thrilled with this. This has actually but apparently it's been a very divisive issue within the community. It was at least initially, a rather divisive issue. Some people were saying they didn't want to bring their X-Men team and have to face off against at first it was just Street Fighter, but they didn't want it to face off against a whole bunch of characters from Street Fighter. This isn't Marvel vs. Capcom. If they want to play Marvel vs. Capcom, they'll hop on, find a way to play one of the various Marvel vs. Capcom games. But since then, there have been numerous non-comic book based properties. For example, BioShock Infinite, Assassin's Creed, Gears of War, Iron Maiden, which was basically 10 sculpts based upon how the band's logo character Eddie looked on various covers. They're all quite cool. There have also been, now these sets based on non-comic book properties are usually sold in 10 to 30 figure gravity feed sets, which they're referred to as gravity feeds is because they're packed. The individual boosters are packed in a box. You pull one out, and another one falls down. Gravity feed. There have also been comic book movie tie-ins, which are also done usually as gravity feeds. And some, on rare exception, there have been sets which were basically gravity feeds, the Streets of Gotham set had was largely sold in single figure boosters, but not so much as a gravity feed. Also, gravity feeds are now released as well as tie-ins with every booster set. There's a 10-figure gravity feed, which has the same sculpts which will use the same sculptural set. If a generic is used, then a slightly different name is used to differentiate, and also the dials are quite different. Now, this is something that's not been new to the Nika era, but has truly been much more refined under. That would be storyline events. Now, there were two quasi storyline events back in 2007. First, there was the coming of Galactus to coincide with the release of Avengers. For 4 weeks, it was a 5-week event. For 4 weeks straight, players would get a free Herald of Galactus as a participation prize. I don't recall there being any other prize support, but I could be mistaken because I did really poorly in those. Then at the end, now it differed by venue, but some venues would basically would kind of do it as a running tournament, all 5 weeks, and then whoever was the top spot at the end of the 5th week got a repainted Galactus, as would the Fellowship player. Then with Justice League, there was Starro Attacks, which gave us 4 Starro slaves, as well as the Starro Colossal. Again, these were rather simplified things. However, starting in 2012, I want to say, Nika and Wizkid started doing storyline events. The first of which being the Infinity Gauntlet. As a participation prize, you would first get a gauntlet resource dial, much like the utility belt resource dial I showed on our last HeroClix 101 video. And you could then attach then each week you got a gem, which you could attach each one to it. There was also there were also 6 figures, which were prize support, each one coinciding with the with the gem that month. These were also I might add also that the storyline events were done on a monthly basis. And then the big finale would be in the case of Infinity Gauntlet, it was Thanos with the gauntlet, and it was basically it was considered a colossal because of the large dial, but otherwise it's a standard figure. If I remember correctly, I've never actually seen it. Then there was No Man's Land, which gave us the Batcave resource dial. Then Fear Itself, which Fear Itself further refined things and in a manner that I personally, as someone who cannot really get to local tournaments, is not too fond of, and that's by having a full set dedicated to the storyline event. It's one thing to have a handful of LEs, but Fear Itself and the current War of Light both ended up putting out, like I said, full sets with new figures, new dials, and as I said, not that happy. And each week, again, there's a specific resource which is part of which is a prize for Fear Itself. It was the Hammers of the Mighty, or the Worthy. For Fear Itself, it's been lantern batteries and rings, which that's also something else that's become a major, has changed greatly during the Nika era. That's the large amount of non-figure 3D elements. For example, the speech bubbles from Deadpool. Invincible Iron Man had the Mandarin's rings, all 10 of them, and in fact you can actually wear said rings. And then of course there's been the aforementioned Infinity Gems, and as well as the utility belt pouches and whatnot. But that's what they've been. That's what they've been doing. Future storyline events, anyone's guess. I mentioned set design, and I kind of got off on a tangent. During the review era, set design was fairly loose. You had a vague theme, but somehow other things got worked into it that did not fit the theme. With starting with the Cursor era, we've had much tighter themed sets. Avengers was almost completely Avengers-related characters with very few differences. Some of the only ones I can really call as being not really Avengers-related would be the Ultimates characters, but even then, the Ultimates are the Ultimate Universe version of the Avengers, so it's not entirely far-fetched. And in fact, one thing that has been happening quite a bit, or that happened for a while, would be sets that focused on a specific event. And now you're getting, and of course, there's been a lot more sets that focus on specific characters, such as Invincible Iron Man, Deadpool, Batman, and in fact, those were all fairly tightly themed sets. The Iron Man, Invincible Iron Man did have the addition of Alpha Flight as a sub theme, just as but at the same time, it had all your core members right there at once. Deadpool, surprisingly enough, Deadpool did have the sub theme of Thunderbolts, with Deadpool's involvement. So, but it was, yeah, the set design has actually been a lot tighter, and it's been a very well done, in my opinion, in the NECA era. I do really wish that chase figures would go away. I'm getting really sick of them. Because, I mean, don't get me wrong, it's all well and good that, yes, it's a means to get people to buy more boosters. And I hope, oh, well, maybe I'll get a chase figure. Hence the fact that they're called chase figures. But it's just insane. And it gets to be annoying. Anywho, that's all I've got for today. There actually may be another video later on tonight, or possibly tomorrow. I haven't decided yet. I may be going to the movies this afternoon to go see Interstellar. If so, I'll probably pop up a review on here. Of course, if I don't, I will be back on Wednesday with the weekly TV roundup. But other than that, that's about all I got for now. So this is Rock and Roll Spock signing off, and as always, live long, rock hard.